All right, we're back. It is COMP123 and the summer 2016 semester at Centennial, and it's week 11, part 3 of our broadcast. We're talking more about Windows forms and data access. Where last we left off, I just want to run the application we have. And by the way, this is up on GitHub. We had kind of something like this, right? Where we had a couple names, and then we want to add a new student. And here's a student. And the way we did this last time was to set up a database, right? Access to a database. And again, the way we did that was we created a database locally, right? So if I was going to go to SQL Server Object Explorer, and if I look at local DB projects v13 where I had the database, in this case, I have two. One of them is COMP123. Here it is, right? And COMP123, if you see, has these tables. So I'm going to go to the tables again. If I look at the student tables by going to View Data, then I can see that I have these students that are kind of, in the table, and that's why we're getting that data. We've used the data grid view control, right? That's what we did to create the form. So if you look at the form itself, if I go and the data grid view control is there. If you want to download my project, you can always go on GitHub under Centennial, and to catch up with me, COMP123 summer 2016 lesson 11 should be under the GitHub repository Centennial College /COMP123 summer 2016 lesson 11. If you want to go there, that is located, just to show you it so you can get it properly. Probably number 1 now on the there it is. So it's COMP123. I put it up recently just so you can get there. So if you go to that one, you'll have everything that I have at this point. If you wanted to kind of start from there and then run that repository. Okay. One thing I've added is an enum, and we've talked about enums before. And what I want to do, and this is the plan for today, is, and I've expanded my little window here so you can see I've got my little add student, and I've made my window a little larger. And what I've done is I've got 3 columns: first name, last name, and number, right? Remember, my number is the student number, right? And what I want to do is add a few more columns in here, right? So I can do different functions. First, we're going to start off with the add student. We're going to try doing the add student piece, right? And then after add student is working, right, what I want to do is I want to add some columns for getting student details, editing the student, right, and then deleting the student. All those 3 pieces, right? We need to do the full CRUD. Now, it may take us into next week to do this properly, because remember, we have this week and next week for data. And also next week, what I want to try and do is convert what we have here. We're using just ADO.NET with Link. I want to convert this project to an EF project, Entity Framework. So we're going to start using Entity Framework next week, which is more of an advanced data framework that helps us model our classes. And we create a class that shows the model of what we're using, and then from there we transfer either to the database or from the database. It's kind of a neat little thing, and it's widely used now in the industry, EF framework, compared to just ADO.NET with Link. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit. So I've got this thing called column button that I added in. Column button is just an enum, right? Remember what enums were? I just added this into the same framework. If I go to the Solution Explorer, if you can add this in too if you want. All I've done I've made a new class called columnbutton.cs, and under the class, right, it's actually an enum. You put, instead of a class, you change the name, the keyword class to enum, with column button as the name, and then I can use details. I've set the details to 4. Well, let me explain why I did this, right? Details equals to 4 means it starts counting internally at 4, 4, 5, 6. That's what these things mean. So the friendly name details represents the number 4. That's what it does. Why? So I can do something like this. Without remembering, I can go column button dot details, and then I know in my head that's the details column. That's what it's for. It's not because I want to confuse anybody. I don't have that column yet, because if you notice, I have 1, 2, 3 columns, right? If I start counting at 0, which is okay, I can count 0. I can go 0, 1, 2. Why? 4. Because, and I got to show you this too, when I actually did the design, And if I look at edit columns as an example, I have student ID here. Student ID 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, and then 4 would be details eventually. That's what I'm planning to do, right? That's why I created that. What I've done is I made the visibility false on the student ID column because we don't have to see it. Okay, that's really kind of important as well. So that's one of the things I did. Again, if you download my project, you'll have all my changes here to this one. Okay, so that's what I've done. It's there, student ID is there, but it's invisible. Okay. Then, if you look at the Solution Explorer, and if I bring up properties, I've done a few other changes to the grid view here. One of the ones, we kind of did some of these last day when we were together, and some I did just to help speed things up. I changed the background color. I changed the background color to white for the grid view, right? Because so that way I can hide some of this stuff. Fixed single is the border for the grid view. If you scroll down, and if you download my project, you'll see all the changes, right? But what I've done is the row headers visibility is false. Row headers is that extra little column that you see on the left that would actually allow you to click or select the whole row. I've taken that visibility away, so it kind of gives me more room for my data grid. That's what I've done, right? So row headers visible is equal to false is there, right? And then as I go down, you can see that I've changed the size of my data grid view to 1027 by 511 and making it a little larger, right? And the whole form itself, if you want to match mine, and if you don't want to download it, is 1069 by 659, just to make it so that's the same as mine. I've got a button right now, and again, the button, all it does is it transports me to the other form, and I've changed the name of my form from Add Student to Student Details. And the reason why I did that is because I'm going to use this form for everything. So instead of having one form for each action, so Add Student, I could have an Add Student form, I could have a Details form, I could have a Delete form, I could have all these forms, one form to do everything, right? And that way you can just use the form that we just call, that has Add Student right now. We change the names of all the labels and make buttons visible and invisible, and then you have one form to do everything, right? Much more efficient than having multiple forms in the project. So that's what I'm planning on doing. Haven't implemented it all yet, just the enum. I've also added a class diagram for you guys so you can see. And right now, just the enum is there, right? So enum is in the class diagram. If you want to add the other objects in the class diagram as well, and all I've done is added a class diagram.cd in there, you can certainly pull them in. If I go student list, I'll pull my student list in there, right? So these are all the methods of the student list, if you really wanted to see all that, including add student button. I have some methods in the background already made, kind of ready to go, right? And the other one I added was student details. There's my student details form. I add that in there too. And there's plenty of methods in there as well that I've got ready to go, right? So we got kind of a couple of these classes, and they're not kind of really showing nicely, but for now, let's just put this column class down here so I can put this next to each other. So say I'll put the student list form on the left, just so you can see it. And then the student, this is the next form that I'm making, which is the student details form over here. Those are the two forms that I've got right now. The reason why I want to show you it this way, so you can see it visually, right? You can see that I've got this data set that I'm using right now called COMP123 data set, and that should be on your, that's what we did last time to create the connection to the database, right? And then we have a bunch of objects that we've made. For example, the cancel button, the different components, first name label, all these things, these fields, even though you can't see them inside the class, because the class is a partial class, actually exist. So when you finally put everything on the diagram, you can see that what is completely in each of the classes. So this is one class, student list form, and the other one is student details form, which is the other class. Okay? So again, I would, to catch up, download my project and load that one up instead of you trying to catch up and modifying the one you have, right? Again, we're limited in time, so I've kind of made some updates. Okay. One thing we need to do is I want to use link to connect with my SQL server, right? And you need a bridge to do that. You can't just connect to the SQL Server directly, right, with LINQ. LINQ is just a query language, right? That's all it is for us. And in order for us to connect with the SQL Server, we need this bridge. And how do we do that? We're going to right-click. I'm just going to leave this diagram for a second. And I'm going to leave this enum behind, right? And I'll even close this up so you can see it. So concentrate on this. Right-click on our COMP123 Summer 2016 Lesson 11. And I'm going to click Add. And we're going to go to New Item. And instead of adding a form, I'm going to click Data. And underneath Data, there is something called Link to SQL Classes. Link to SQL Classes. And what this is the bridge that we need between LINQ, the query language we're using, and SQL. All right, we need this bridge. What it does, it creates a context and also a student model that we can use for us to connect with the student. Okay, when I say student model, think about it as a class, right? And the student class details all the stuff that's inside of our database. Database has the ID, the name of the student, and and the student number, those kind of things, right? Those are the three things it has right now. Let's take a look. So if I add this in, I want to be careful what I call this. So I just don't want to call it data classes 1. That's not good. I want to call this student, right? So student.dbml, right? So again, this is just a diagram that's going to be created here. Let me show you what happens. So boom, I click that. All of a sudden, I have this thing called student DBML diagram. It's right here. What I want to do, right, is I want to go to SQL Server Object Explorer on the left. So I'll pin this up for a second. And then I'll kind of unpin this one so I can get more room. And I want to look at my table, DBO students, and I want to drag the table onto the diagram, okay, like this. What this does is it takes the student, and again, I have first name, last name, and number, right? And it creates a model. So a class, that's what a model is. A class that includes these properties: student ID, first name, last name, and number, right? So now I can reference these properties, right, inside my code. So I need, let's go back. So to go back, I need this bridge, this DBML class, if you will. All right, and I'm going to kind of save that. And I'm also going to build at this point. Building the project, when you download this, it kind of connects everything. Okay, and everything good. If it says build succeeded, we're good to go. All right? This is all prep stuff. And again, I'm recording it, so you can always go back if you want to try it on your own and get it done. We can close this now. So once I've just dragged and dropped my student in there, I'm good to go. I can just close this off. Okay? So again, if I look at my solution now, it looks like this. I have my column button, enum, my COMP123 data set, right, which is I used last time when I created the connection to the database, right? I have my program, which is the main driver class for everything else. Nothing's changed here, right? My program class. I have my student DBML, which I just made, right? And that's the link between my query language, LINQ, L-I-N-Q, with SQL, which is my SQL database. You need that connection, otherwise you can't really do any queries with SQL. It won't connect properly. I need a link to SQL bridge, if you will. And that's what this does. Then I have two forms. One, which is a student details form, which I'm going to make today, I work on today. And the other one is a student list form. Okay. Let's work on the functionality to do the add first. I wanted to kind of add something to the database, right? Let's do that first. So I'm going to go and work with the student details form right now. So student details form, I'm going to open up view code by clicking F7, and let's take a look at that code right now. Right now, there's not much code. All I have in there, the only thing we put in there last time was a public property, right, that we called student list form. And student list form is of type student list form, and we use student list form to kind of point back to the previous form, right? So we can always go back and forth between forms if I want to. That's all we've done. All right, so that's the first thing. Now I know I'm going to need additional properties in here. I'm going to do that. I'm going to need more and more properties in my student details form. But for now, what I want to think about doing is what happens when I add data into the form, and how do I take what's inside the text of my form and convert it into something that applies to the database. All right. So I need to look at, now there's a bunch of buttons I've created, right? A bunch of events I've created for you. One of them is called submit buttons. So when I click my submit button, and let's assume for a second that everything that's added into the form is perfect validation, okay? So don't worry about validation for a second, all right? For now, let's just do one thing at a time. So my submit button, click, and again, if I look at the form, so let's go to my form. So my student details form is what it's called now. If I look at the form itself, when I click, I enters the data. When I click my submit button, boom, it kind of adds all this stuff into the form. And I want to go back to the previous form. Also, let's redo what we did in the cancel button. If I click the cancel button, right, I want to close my form up and go to my previous form. Let's do that first. So just as a review of what we did last time. So I double click with my cancel button. I already have a cancel button click event, right? And inside my cancel button click event, I want to do a couple things. I want to close down, right, what I have here. So I want to say something like this. I want to do this.close, that's for sure, right? So I'm going to close this form, right, with my cancel button click event. And then remember, I created this public property student list form, which is of type student list form, the previous form. That's the type it is, right? It's a form, but I'm specifying that it's the previous form type that I'm going to access, right? And I know that we've already created a link. And if I look at the other previous one, this is all review from last time, okay? If I look at my student list form code for a second, notice that when I went here, right, when I click my add student button itself on the form, I instantiated my student details form, which I called back then, the first time, add student, right? I instantiated it, and I set the property, student list form, which I set up here in this form, right here, student list form. I initialize this property with the keyword this. What this means is I take a reference to the first form, which is student list form, and I send it to the new form that I'm instantiating, right? That's what I'm doing. We're going to do this a lot, right? So whenever I want to send information from one form to the other, I'm going to create properties on the next form, and then I'm going to use the previous form to send data to the other form through these public properties, okay? So in my previous form, in the student list form, I'm instantiating the new form, right? I'm making a reference to the old form, right? And then I'm showing the new form and hiding the old form. That's all I'm doing. So the old form stays actually active, but just hidden, right? And then I bring the new form up, right? Okay. That's what's happening here. So if I go back to this one, now that the new form comes up, right? When I click the cancel button, I want to go back to the previous form. And I want to explain this one more time. So how do I do that? I've got to reference the previous form, which is this. And I go student list form, which is a reference to the previous form, dot show, right? And then I'm going to close this one. Close me means it's gone, right? It's not like hide. Hide and close are a little different. Close means I eliminate close down the form. It doesn't show anymore, and it shuts down a bunch of, it disposes of a bunch of variables. Okay. Well, and the question was, well, if I keep bringing it up over and over again, what happens, right? If I keep clicking the add form and I cancel, does it add new forms? But no, it doesn't, because whenever I click the add button, right, what it does is it reinstantiates that object, a different object for the same, for the same variable. So example would be like this. So before we move on, I would do something like this: add student form, cancel. Add student form, cancel. And you think, well, how many forms can I add? Are they adding forms in the background? No, because I've closed one form down. I'm showing the other form again. When I click that add student button, it's going to reinstantiate another object of that form type. That's all it's doing. Because remember, whenever I open up a form, what I'm really doing is I'm instantiating an object of that form type. When I make a form, I'm actually creating a class with a bunch of properties, right? That we can see. There's also on the back end a designer side. That's why it's called a partial class, right? And what's happening is a bunch of properties that are happening all at the same time when I instantiate that object. But even if it's instantiated, it doesn't show unless I use the show method. Yes?
So
if I do this dot,
yeah, instead of this dot close, this dot hide.
no, it actually would do the same thing, right? Because when we hide it, even then, the only reason why I'm closing it is because it might cause an error, right? If I hide it, and we'll talk about that a little later. So if I go to the new form and I click cancel, oh, okay, I'm back to this one. This is just basic stuff. But what I really wanted is when I click the add new form and I put some data in here, so I start typing, you know, like we'll do a new name like Tammy, you know, Richards. I don't know, some new name, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, and then click on submit. Right. What I wanted to do is take this information and add it into the database. That's a different thing. But remember, once I put the information in there, the text value of each of these text boxes has a value. So I want to take the values from the text boxes and pass them into the database. That's all I want to do. And we're going to use LINQ for that. Let's try this out. So what do I do to make that happen? And we're going to do it on the submit button. The submit button, which is the event that we're going to use, is going to be used to add everything to take things from the text boxes and add them into the database. Yes?
So that's
right. Yes. 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 You'd have to make your own database. Right, you'd have to redo your database because the database that I made is local to me, right? Remember my database, if you notice, is under local DB projects v13. You'd have to go in there and recreate the database, put some dummy data in there, the whole thing. This isn't part of my GitHub, unfortunately, right? You'd have to make that. So you'd probably already have that if you're following along last day, okay? So you have to redo the connection string. The connection string points to my database. That's a good question, though. If you're going to pull it down, how would it work? And if I looked at my Solution Explorer, I have an app.config file, app.config. And if I double click on here, you can see that the connection string for the database is right here, right? Connection string, right? And this points to my projects v13, blah, blah, blah. You may not have projects v13. You might have projects v12, right? That's okay. You can just, if you create your database with SQL Server Object Explorer and I right click on my database, so let's bring up some properties for a second. This is what I showed you guys last time, but I'll review this too. If I bring up the properties for the database, if you need to change the connection to yours, if I right click here on this, the actual the connection itself, the local DB, if I click properties, it's going to bring up the connection string, right? This is the connection string for the entire data, for the entire database, right? Everything. Notice down here, one of the properties is connection string. And in here, if you double click on the connection string and copy it, right, then I can go back into my AppConfig and replace my connection string with yours. You can just kind of replace this whole line here with the connection string you're getting by right-clicking and then pasting. And when you do that, it just changes the catalog, the default catalog, which is the database, and then recreates the connection string altogether. Remember that when we connect using SQL Server Object Explorer, what's happening is, right, that we are connecting to a database server. These database servers that I'm listing here are the ones that are local to my system that are just SQL Server Express. That's what it is, right? That's part of Visual Studio. When you download and install Visual Studio, you have SQL Server Express running in a local DB. That's what it is. And then what you want to do is you want to connect to these servers. I would connect to Azure because we can connect to Azure. There's servers we can make in Azure as well. But the problem is here at the college, like I said before, is we're blocked. We can't connect to Azure. There's the ports are blocked. The port gods, you know, IT basically said, you know, we have to block these ports because it's a security issue, so we can do things locally. Otherwise, you can connect to my database. Okay, so AppConfig, this is where all the connections happen. Let me go back to what I was saying. So what we want to do is when I click my submit button on the list, right, to add, or sorry, on the details form to add the data, I want to get the data from these fields, right, and put them into the database. But we need to have a reference to the database in order for me to do that, right? So that's something to know, to think about as well. So first things first, let's think about the database itself, right? What I want to do is I want to create a new student. That's what I want to do, right? That's one. And the other one I need is I need a reference to the database context. Remember we just made that context, DB, blah, 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 right? Well, I need that too. So let's try this out. So I'm going to start typing and see if it picks it up for me. So I'll say student, right? And if I go data context, you should be able to bring this up too. If I go student data context, where am I getting that? Student data context. I'll tell you in a second. We're going to call this DB is equal to a new student data context. Okay, so where am I getting this? I need the new keyword. Where am I getting this from? Student data context, if you notice where it comes from, is from this other stuff that I just put in, this stuff here, student DBML. Student DBML, if I look through there, it actually gives you, there's on the background, this is a partial class. And on the background, if I actually was to look at or peek through student data context, if I go right click, now if I want to peek definition, it's going to show me the partial class that's in the background for the student data context, which also shows me the connection. Here's my connection to my database. So student data context has been created for me on the back end. And also, if I scroll down, I have a nice definition of my student. Here's my student. Take a look. Student ID, first name, last name, number. This automatically gets generated for you when you make that connection, that link to SQL Server Connect, the bridge that we just made. That does all this for you on the background, which is nice. Otherwise, in the previous versions of C#, we'd have to create it by ourselves, which is a pain in the ass, right? So we don't want that. So if you notice, when it comes down to it, all the same stuff, the same getters and setters are here for each one of my, and it's really detailed, by the way, for each one of my my properties. Here's my last name, here's my getter, and here's my setter. My setter is more complex, if you notice, right? But it's been automatically generated for us. So I have access to all of the model that I'm talking about in the background that's been automatically generated from this SQL to, or linked to SQL bridge that I added in, okay? I don't need this right now, but I want to point out where I got this from. This doesn't come from nowhere. This comes because it's been automatically generated. Okay, good. So what this does is creates a reference to the database itself, right? That's what it does, to the database. And this is to the SQL database. So the SQL database, right, is represented now by the variable DB. I made it small. You can call it SQL database. You can call it, you know, whatever the name of the database is, local DB, blah, blah, blah. You know, if you really want to go crazy. You can also call this DB context, database context. It's just a reference to the database. Okay, number one. Second, I know I have a student model that's also been generated for me, right? And in there, what I want to do is I want to use something like this. I'm going to say student, follow me here. We're gonna call student, that's the actual name of the class now, right? New student, we'll call it, because we're adding a new student, is equal to new student. Okay, because student, again, if I was going to right-click, if I right-click on student to see peak definition, right? So I want to see where where did I get that student class, right? Again, it's been automatically generated for me right here inside the DBML, the studentdesigner.cs file, right? It's all inside there for me. I don't have to do the work, right? That's good. That means that the student model has been designed for me. And then from the student model, if you think about it, what does a student model have? Well, if I go just to start typing, if I go something like new student, right? New student dot, look what I get. First name, last name, number, student ID. I get all the details that I would normally want to add into my database table. My database table now and this new student, it's the same. It's a representation. This is a data representation here in code of my database table on the SQL server. That's what's happening, all right? I'm going slow because I don't want to lose anybody. This can get pretty hairy. So what I want to do is I want to do something like this. I want to assign my first name, my last name, and my number to the object, to the data that I'm going to get from this text box, these text boxes. Let's do that. So here we go. So say first name. And I want to say, well, that is the first name text box, right? So first name textbox.text is what I'm going to use for that. So I'm going to say, well, get my first name textbox.text, a string, and assign it to my first name that's part of my student object that's relating to the model from the database. That's number one. Second, new student last name is equal to first name text or last name text box dot text. Sorry, I'll be okay. Last name, be careful. Last name text box dot text. There we go. And then the next one, right? And if, by the way, if I spelled it wrong, last name won't work. Last name text box dot text. And then new student dot number, right, is equal to student number text box dot text. There we go. So I've got the data coming from one to the other. That's the first piece. So I want to copy data or into student object from form text boxes. I'm doing here. So I'm taking the form text boxes, I'm transferring the data from the form text boxes into the student object, right? So now my student object is full. It's got everything that it needs except for the student ID. Remember that the student ID is going to be automatically generated by the SQL server. The SQL server has a primary key that's auto-incrementing that we described last week. By the way, if you're worried, this is not the last time we're going to do this. I'm going to do this whole thing again one more time after this next week with Entity Framework, right? But so we did this. Now the next one. I want to say something like this now. I want to insert this data into the database, right? So we need to use a special command, and we have to reference the database table. So this is what I want to do. I want to insert, the student object, the new student object, right, into the database, into the SQL database, right? That's what we want to do. I'm just telling you what we're doing, so that way you can see it here on the video, and also know for yourself if you need to do this like on an exam. Right? Just saying, right? Okay, how do I do this? DB, which is my reference to the database right here, right? I have reference the database, and then dot, and now I have to do something with the database. And I would do something, this is kind of weird. I want to say get table, right? Get table is the method that gets the table from the database, and I need to make a reference to the type of table that I want. Which table is it? Well, it's the student table, which is of type student, right? So get a reference to the database, the table database from, or the student table from the SQL database, right? And then what I want to do is, I want to use with object chaining, I want to do an insert on submit, the new student object. That's the syntax, right? And I'm using, this is the, what we're doing is we're making a reference, again, with the link, making a reference to the database. We're saying, hey, go to the database, get the table that's the student table, and then insert on submit. So whenever I click the submit button, I'm submitting the data, all the stuff that I just made. I made a new student object, I got all the data, I filled it up with data, insert this into the table, right, into the actual database. And then finally, in order for me to make things work, and this is just a requirement of us doing this, we need to update the database itself, because it's not enough for me just to say insert. I need to, I'm just going to show you what this does here. I'm going to go down in here and say, okay, so now I want to save my changes. Save changes, right? So I insert it, and now I want to save changes, and of course the way to do that is db.submitChanges. Because what I'm doing is I'm working with this stuff in memory. I've created an object in memory, and now I want to go to the database and say, hey, the stuff of the connections I've just made, take those connections and physically make the changes to the database. Okay, cool. So this is part of it. Now, I can add the database, it's added, but then my form is just going to sit there after I click submit. It's not going to do anything. It's going to just add the stuff to the database, and it's going to be still full. So there's a couple things I need to do. I need to close my form and open up the other one, right? And then I have to somehow reread the list from the database, because right now the database list is was from the old list, and I got to be able to reread that again. That's a different problem. Let's see this first. So first I want to do is, hide this or close this form, and this would be this.close, right? That's the first thing. And then what I want to do is I want to show the previous form again, right? Which is, show the list form, right? The student list form, student list form. That's the other one. And I'm going to do that by going this dot student list form dot show. And by the way, do I want to show it first or close it first? I think I want to do it the other way around, right? Because if I do this, it's going to be closed. Nothing's going to happen, right? Because once it closes, it's gone, right? I don't want to do it this way. The order is actually quite important, so we want to kind of do it like this. So show the form first and then close it. It's going to happen so quickly that you won't be able to see that the other one's going to be on top for a second. And that's really it in a nutshell. That's all we need to do the add. We're going to insert. So when we do, remember we talked about, we want to do full CRUD. And again, CRUD is create, read, update, delete. We haven't done the update, delete yet, but we've done the read, and this is the create. All right, and let's see if it works. So we're going to run the application, and if everything goes well and we don't get any errors, we've got our names, and I want to click Add Student. I got my new student, so I'm going to add in. Like I said, I don't know. We'll call something else. I don't know. Give me a name you want to add in.
Asad.
Huh?
Asad. Where's Asad?
Asad?
Yeah.
Okay. 2 S's. S. Spell.
H-A.
Oh. Hassan, right? Huh? And then last name? Spell it. Right? Love it. Right? And we'll just put a number in 1, 2, 3. Forget your student, because this is being shared on the internet, right? So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever, right? I want to click submit. So it's supposed, what the behavior is supposed to be is this form will close. It's going to submit the data to the database, and we're going to bring up the other form with the new data. But we're going to have a problem, and I want to show you this. So submit. Oh man, where is it? First of all, let's check to see what happened. Did it actually go to the database? I'm going to go to my SQL Server Object Explorer again, pin it up. Let's take a look at the database data. And I think this is when we start doing troubleshooting with a simple table like this, we want to do this. I want to go view data. Did it get added? And the answer is we're successful. Here's something that happened. Look at this. Like it kind of made a student ID of 1,002. That's okay, right? Don't worry about that. That's just something that it did on its own, right? It generated the ID for you, right? So here's your name, and then it's in the database. Okay, that's cool. I want to show this in the database, but it should show it right away, right? Well, let me take a look. So if I run it now, it should show it, yeah? There it is. I'm good. How come it didn't show it when we came back? Remember, we hid the table, right? The whole thing was hidden. We didn't do anything to it. We didn't say, hey, go back and read the form. It's not an automatic connection. I don't want you to think of it that. I want you to always say, I got to pull the database again, right? Which means I got to look at the original form, right? So this is the student form. This is student details form, the CS on the back end. And what I want to go in is onto the actual student list form, the original one, the student list form, right? And I want to look at the code for this one. So let's take a look at the code, right? So here's my code. And on the back end, right, what I want to do is look and see where this is being listed. It's being listed right here. Student list form load. By the way, the load command, the load event happens one time, right? When the actual form loads for the first time. I need another kind of event, and it's going to be in the activated event. The activated event means every time the form comes to the foreground, it triggers the activated event. That's a different kind of event than a load. Load happens one time. Activated happens every time you bring that form up. It refreshes. So I want to take this code that's inside my form load, and I want to put it in the activated event. Now, I generated all these events for you automatically. I wanted to show you this. So just to go back to the original list form, right? Because the list form itself is what I want to show you here, this. If I click on the form itself and I go to properties, you can see that I've got several events that I've already kind of put up. One of them is the activated event that I've double-clicked to create that stub. That's all I've done in advance for you. So you don't have to do it for on your own, right? So I've double-clicked on the activated event to create the stub. And if I double-click again, it's just going to take me there again. Here it is, right? Here's the activated event. So what I want to do is I want to move this, which says this student table adapter.fill, as an example, with our data set that we got, right, with the connection. I want to move this piece, this line. I'm going to cut it out of the load, and I'm going to put it inside my activated, right? This isn't going to change anything in terms of the way it populates, because load and activated, the way it works is like this, right? When the form loads, it also triggers the activated event because it's being drawn, right? It's being painted onto the screen for us, right? And when I put it in the background, if I minimize the form, right, and I bring it back up, it's being activated again. And so every time I do this, it keeps on refreshing the screen. It'll keep doing that, right? So this is where it needs to be in the activated event. Okay, let's try it out and see if it works. So first of all, let's see if it just by itself does it read everything I want. Yay, and this is good. All right, now let's add another student. Okay, and we'll add in another one. Like we'll add Peter Parker in here. So Peter Parker, Spider-Man, right? And we'll make another, kind of student number 987654, right? Whatever, and add submit. Click submit button. Oh, there's Peter Parker. See how it updated automatically because it got redrawn, it got reactivated. That's the event that I want, and now it's going to fill the data in again. It's going to run that fill command another time, and it'll keep doing it every single time. Even when I minimize like this and put it back, it'll rerun that command. Okay, repaint everything. Okay, so this works well. I can add a student. Now I need the buttons in place. I need the buttons in place for me to go and delete a student, but I can't put them up on top here. And the reason why is because they have to be related to a specific student down in here, right? I can't just delete whatever student I want. I have to delete the one that I'm selecting, right? That becomes more challenging. Same thing with editing and getting the details for each of the students, right? I have to be able to select whatever student I'm using. And that's why I've left these extra spaces over here. We're going to create a few non-data related columns, right, like we've already done, in order for us to do that. Let's do this together. First, let's add the columns, then we'll add the code, right? Okay, how do we do this? I'm going to go to my student list. I'm working with my student list now, and I'm going to right-click or click onto my data grid view, and on this little smart arrow right here, I'm going to bring up edit columns. Okay, edit columns. Right, cool. There's my edit columns. Now, if you notice, I only have my student ID, first name, last name, and number. I want to add 3 more columns. Let's add the new one. And I'm going to call this an unbound. Notice how it says there's the data-bound columns, and then there's an unbound column. I'm going to make an unbound column. Unbound means it does not connect it to any data source. It's just a text column, whatever, right? And my column name is important, right? I want to make my column name, we'll start off with details. So here's my details, all right? And then the type is data grid view text box column. Do I want to make it a text box column? No, I want to make it a button. And if you pull this down, you can see that there's several options for templates. One of them is a button column, right? There's also a checkbox, a combo box, all kinds of other stuff in here, right? I want to use the button column, so I want to choose this one. So data view button column is what I want to select, and I want to change the header text to details as well, right? All right, once I've done this, I want to do this several times. I'm going to choose add, right? And let's do another one. So we'll add another column, another unbound column that we're going to call edit. And it's going to be a data grid view button column again. And we're going to use the header text as edit and click add that one. So edit, my edit column. Let's add another one, all right? And the new one is going to be called delete. Right, here's my delete, and here's my, on the header text, we're going to put in delete, right? So delete, and then click add, and now close. So now I have 3 columns, but they're in the wrong spot. I want them to move down here, so I'm going to move them down with these arrows, right? So it's delete. I'm going to click this edit and move this down over here, below that one, and I'm going to click delete. That's the last one, and move this one all the way here. There we go. The details, edit, delete. Now I know this is going to pose some issues because I've done this before. And one of the things that you have to notice is that the width of these columns is all going to be different depending on the size of the text that's inside of them, which make it pretty ugly. So if you look at the behavior here, right? If you look down, by the way, let's put in some text. See the text over here? Header text and text. Let's put the text to make it the same. So I'm saying details. Trust me here. On the edit, let's make this edit. Under delete, let's make it delete. This is still inside the this little edit columns dialog box, right? Go back to delete the details for a second. If I scroll down here, you can see that I have read only is equal to false, resizable is equal to true. Do I really want these columns to be resizable? The answer is no. So I'm going to put that as false, right? And same thing with edit. Edit's going to be false. I don't want to resize these columns ever, right? So I'm going to kind of put these as false. Go back. Let's keep going and see what else. Data property, I'm going to leave blank. Design, edit, column, data type button, that's fine. Auto size mode for my delete and all these buttons. I want to make it so the auto size mode is none. It's very important. Don't let it be sized automatically because the size of the button is going to be depending on the text that's inside, right? So let's change this from a width perspective. I know this number is 150. 150. So the minimum width of each of the buttons, I guess I'm going to change my auto size mode from not set. I'm going to change this to none and then go to 150. Same thing with the last button. So I'm going to go to from not set, I'm going to go to none and then go to 150. There we go. I've just done a bunch of changes now to the buttons. Let's take a look at what they look like. If I press the OK button, it should give us a preview of what the buttons will look like. So here's my edit, my details, my edit, my delete. I don't know if I like the headers right now, but that's okay. Let's see what happens when I run the actual code. So run it. In my design view, you should see something like this, right? Details, edit, delete. If you see something with the buttons names, that's even better. You see the button names instead? You might see something like this, right? But this is where the button names are going to be. Each of these buttons, right, is where I want all this stuff to be. This, when I click the details button, it's going to show me the details. It's going to show me the details page, but instead of saying add student, it's going to say details, right? Let's undo this thing for a second. So we're not quite done. Let's go back in here and take a look at this thing. So I'm going to click on this little arrow here as an example and go edit columns, right? And if I look at the details column and look all the way to the top, you can see that one thing I'm missing is use column text for button value. I want to change this from false to true. I forgot that one. And I got to do the same things for the other one. So use text for button column from false to true. And the same thing goes with this. All of them are changed. There we go. Now if I press OK, and if I press run, let's run this thing. You can see that, oops. If I press run, as you can see now, I've got this plus an extra one. And we're going to figure this one out in a second, right? But I got this extra column down here we're gonna kind of get rid of. But if you notice, they've got these buttons here, right? So these buttons, all these buttons down here, what they do is if I click on the button, I have to respond to the button. But how do I know which button I'm clicking on? These buttons do not have, they absolutely do not have their own button event type. They just don't. I wish they did, right? I wish also that I could put my own custom buttons in here, right, instead of accepting the buttons that are in here. It's not so easy to do because Data Grid View and Windows Web Forms in general, they're kind of old, right? So they only enable us to do a few things. But the most common thing to make Windows applications still, believe it or not. All right, so this is something that I want. So if I double click on click on my button, my details button, for this row, it's going to give me the details just for this person, right? And same thing if I click this row, it's going to give me the details for this person. That's what I want, how I want it to function. How do I know? How can I tell my form, my details form, that I want it to be a details form? not an add form. Because right now, if I click add student, right, it does the new, this form becomes an add student form. That's what it is, right? I want to change this form to just show details. That's the first thing I want to do, is just to read the database, right? That's the first task I want to do. Okay, let's take a look at how we can do this. Well, there's a couple things. We need to be able to tell the form, this form, what type of form it's going to be, right? Let's cancel this and stop the program for a second, and we'll fix everything as we go, right? So that means the student details form itself, there's got to be some kind of property that talks about the form type. Well, I might as well make a property like that. Let's do it. So at the top, we'll make another property, and we'll call it, we'll use it and make it an integer. So it's the integer, the number, based on our enum, remember, 4, 5, 6, is going to be the form type. So form type is going to be a property that I can access, right? Form type. On that, you know what? I'm also going to have to carry over the student ID. I'm going to have to say which student is it that I'm going to reference. So knowing that I have to kind of view a specific student, I'm going to do it by student ID. Even though the value is hidden right now in my data grid view, I want to take the student ID and pass that over to the new form too, because that's the one I want. So I'm going to say public int, it's an integer, student ID. I'm going to make this lowercase for now. Actually, I'll make it uppercase. Student ID, right? It's just another value. It's just another getter setter, right? Another public property. I've got 3 public properties now. Here are my public properties, right? So public properties. I just made these, right? So one is the student list form, which tells me about my previous form. So this references previous form, right? This one, what type of form is it? What type of form do I need, right? This one is, what is the student ID of the row that is clicked? That's what these things are asking. That's what these things do, right? Now these 2 values here, I need to fill those in. Where do I fill those in? On the previous form, right? Because I'm going to send them to this form. So I'm going to go back to my student list form over here, and now I need to kind of figure this out. I've got some extra events here. One of them is cell context or content click. This event, cell content click event. How did I get that? The cell content click event. Well, if I go back to my designer, and if I actually double click on one of these cells like this, I'm going to get the cell content click event. That's what's going to generate, right? And that's what I want. When I click on the cell, which is going to be a button in this case, it's going to generate, then it's going to open up my new form again. So I need to do that same thing that I kind of did before. So on the student list form, this is kind of critical we do this properly, right? I want to do the following. First of all, I want to kind of generate some of these problems, right? So I want to say, okay, so my student details form, right? May generate a new form is equal new student, we'll call it student details this time, right? It's not an add student anymore, right? And is equal to a new student details form. All right, so that's the first thing I'm doing. I'm making a new form, just like I did up here when I kind of passed over this one. I'm doing it another time. And the reason why is this is different because it's the add form, right? It's unique. But this one here is going to be just for any other kind, like for delete, details, or edit, right? One of those 3 things is going to go here. That's number 1. Next, I want to do something like this again. So I want to say, we're kind of duplicating, but I want to say student details, this one, right? Dot student list form, this one, this is the property from the other form, right, is equal to this. We're going to still give a reference to this form, right? So I'm going to say, hey, this, make a reference back to me, right? Create a reference so I can get back to me again if you're going to close my form up, just like we did last time. And next, I want to say something like this: student details, right? Dot form type, my form type. We made that property, right? Is equal to. How do I figure this out? Well, this is interesting. When I click on this column, my cell content click, I have an E. This E is the event, right? Well, the event gives me two values: the column index and the row index. It actually gives me both those values, which is really useful for me. So I can do something like this. I can say, well, it's equal to the column index. Undo. Column index. So I'm saying I'm getting this from the value from whatever column I'm clicking, whatever row, whatever cell I'm clicking, I'm getting the column index. And I'm taking this value and putting it over to the form type. Remember the form type? I'm using an enum 4, 5, 6. If I click on the details view, that's going to be column 4. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? So I know which column I'm clicking. Because I know which column I'm clicking, I can respond to it on the other side, and I can make a switch statement to say, if my form type is 4, then do this type of stuff. If my form type is 5, do this type of stuff, and so on. So that's the first thing. Next, now this is more difficult, and I'm going to give you the code for it because it took a little bit of rework for me, right? I'm going to say student details. This is the most critical part, actually. Student details, and then I want to say student ID. The student ID of the new form, I'm going to pass in the student ID now. Okay, how do I figure out the student ID? All right, this is a little bit crazy. First of all, we know that the data grid view is where all this stuff is being stored. My student ID is inside the student data grid view. So let's do that. So I'll say students data grid view. That's where the actual form, the actual data grid view itself, the whole data grid view, right? And then dot rows. I'm looking at the rows, and I'm going to reference the row index. So E again, I'm getting the E from here, from which row I clicked, right? E row index. That's what's going to be in the index here, right? So rows. And then I want to say the cell in the row, for the cells that I'm accessing, that really is equal to the student ID. I got to reference which row I'm looking for. So I'm going to I have to put in their student ID, right? And I want to get the value. This is where it's a little funky. The value of that row, right? But the problem is, if I do it like this, I'm just going to show it to you. This is actually what you need to do, right? So I'm saying, hey, go to the student data grid, because the student data grid is going to have my student ID. I'm going to read it from the database, right? This is what's happening, right? Look at the row and the cell, the row and the column, right? I want to look at that row and the column, and the row that I want to look at is the student ID row, or the column of the student ID. On that row, or the column, I mean, get the row that's associated, so cross-reference the row and the column, and give me the student ID that I've just clicked on, right, of the row, right? But the problem is, if you notice what I get back, it says cannot implicitly convert type object to type int. So what do I need to do? Convert it to an integer. Let's do that. So this is the last piece. So I'm going to say convert to int32. What this is going to do is take my this object, which is going to return a value of an integer value anyway, and it's going to convert it to an integer. That means that my ID, my student ID, is going to be converted to an integer that I can reference later on in the next form. So now I have in here, right here, I have the student ID. I have the student ID, right? Okay. We're going to test this in a second, right? Okay, now, of course, after this, I'm going to reference all this stuff, what it does, right? So this is send in the button that is clicked. Send over, I should say, send over the button that is clicked. I'm clicking on which column am I clicking on, which button, right? This is just making a reference to the form, the new form. Create the new student details form. That's what I'm doing here, right? This one's making a reference, make a reference to this form, right? So that way we can go back, right? And this last part is the most critical part. I'm going to make another column. I'm just going to separate it. I'm going to say, get the student ID from the data grid view, the student's data grid view. So this does. So get the student ID. All right. for now, we weren't going to, even though I've created a reference to the new form, let's not open it. All I want to do is, can I see the student ID? I want to check to see if I'm getting a student ID. And I can do that by doing a, again, remember on the forms, I need to do a debug.writeLine, debug.writeLine, and I'm just going to put in whatever the student ID is. So I'm going to say, just for now, I'm going to say student details dot student ID. I'm going to read that student ID that I just made. And I've kind of put it out there. So this is, I'm actually reading the form, the other form. I'm bringing it back. And I'm going to read it and print it out. Let's see if it works, right? So I just want to print it. I'm using debug.writeLine just to show that, did I actually get a student ID when I clicked on one of those buttons? Did I? Let's see. So I'm going to run this form. And if everything goes well, I should be able to read that. So if I click on, now watch what you want to watch here is the output window, which is down here. Here's the output window, right? So watch. If I click on details, I get a student ID of 1, right? See, 1 down here. If I click on edit, I still get a student ID of 1 because it's the same row. If I click on the bottom one, remember we get that weird one that we got from yours? It should be like 1,000 and something. Let's take a look. Oh, 1,002. How about Peter Parker? It's probably going to be like 1,003, right? There we go. But if I click on these ones, Tony, right? Tony Stark is only number 4, right? So now I've got the student ID. Now that I know the student ID, I can do my deletions, I can do my edits, I can do everything. I have access to which one of them I'm doing, and I can access the database this way. This is critical. If I don't have the student ID, which one am I editing? I don't know, right? Now, nothing's showing up yet, but it will. Let's try this out. So first of all, I know now that everything works. So now we're going to do the same thing that we did up here, right? Which is the student form show and hide. We're going to do the same thing, but instead of the add student form, we're going to just call it a different thing. We're going to say student details, right? Dot show, and we're going to say this dot hide, right? So hide this form, and then show the student details form. Okay, that's nice. That's really nice. My first thing that I want to do, and we'll do this before when we come back from break, so I'm going to take a break now. The first thing I want to do is I want to pull the database again, depending on which one I press, details, edit, blah, blah, and then pull in the data for myself, right? Pull the data into the form that I made, right? So when we come back, I'm going to pull the database, get the data from the form based on the student number. So I'm going to say something like this: from student in db.students, right? Where student ID is equal to this dot student ID, select student. And then I'm going to convert that, right? I'm going to use another little code that says, give me one or default, right? And then it's going to give me that one student, and then I'm going to read the data from that student and put it into the text boxes. That's what I'm going to do. Okay, it's quite easy. Let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll do all that work.